much for attending my talk today. The crowd is really huge today, and I'm very excited to be here. So, my name is Ridhwana Khan, and I am a senior software engineer at a company called Smile Identity. To give you a little bit of background on what Smile Identity does, we basically use machine learning and facial recognition to be able to verify people's identity. I'm also really passionate about cultivating diverse and inclusive places, especially within the tech industry. And finally, I care very deeply about the education space in South Africa. So I run an NPO called Kasimats, and we basically delve in the education space. So in this talk, I'd like to chat more about that third point around the education space. So I'd like to talk about how do we empower and expose students in South Africa, especially within the non-developed communities, to be able to be best equipped for the world out there, so that they can have a better future for themselves and for their children. I'll talk a little bit about what I've done in the space so far, what problems exist, what measures were taken in order to produce solutions, and how we as a community can work together to improve the education space. So, my background, just on how I started Kasimats. About 2 years ago, I was on a program in the US called Tech Woman. And during this program, there was a socioeconomic component where we were asked to solve one of the socioeconomic problems in South Africa. At least have a think about it and come up with some solutions. So after some thought, myself and my colleagues, we discussed and we researched and we came up with a couple of options. And we finally realized that the education space is actually one that needs dire help. We were in absolute shock when we realized that in order for students to pass from grade to grade at school, they simply needed 40% in 4 subjects, one being the home language. They then needed 30% in another 3 subjects, and they needed 2% as a coordination in a subject if it would allow them to pass. All this time, whilst the Department of Education kept on lowering the standards, universities were not changing their requirements. And so in order to study something in the STEM course at UCT or at FITS, you still need approximately 80% in mathematics as an entrance. Now, I'm sure you've deduced that this causes limited options for these students. This, coupled with other issues that I will highlight in the talk, caused Kasimats to be born. So Kasimats received an initial funding from the US Embassy because they believed in our idea. And we then registered our nonprofit organization and we started on our journey. So what is Kasimats, you might ask? Kasimats is a fun and interactive after-school STEM enrichment hub. We teach students that maths is fun, maths is essential, and maths is everywhere. In a more practical sense, we help students with their foundation in mathematics and in all other subjects. We expose them to STEM, and we show them how they use these subjects that they learn in school in the real world, and what options are available to them afterwards. We need to remember that since STEM skills are vital for future job opportunities, and we are living in a society where technology is getting more advanced with time, it is better to teach students digital and STEM skills in a way that complements their foundation, promotes their growth while piquing their interests. This sounds easily achievable, right? Well, not really. So in South Africa, we have a number of economical, foundational, resource, and infrastructure issues that we need to take into consideration. The next couple of slides will be about these problems and what we experience in South Africa. So the first one is, according to statistics in 2019, there are 31 learners per educator in a public school, whilst in private schools, there are only 11 students per educator. That means there are 3 times as many students per educator in a public school than in a private school. This, coupled with a lack of resources, language barriers, foundational issues and financial burdens make it difficult for educators to see effective results, and hence they feel a little bit overwhelmed and dissatisfied with frustration. Another issue that we have is the infrastructure and resource availability within schools, which makes basic teaching difficult, but makes teaching STEM skills even more difficult. From this table, you can see that there is a dire shortage of infrastructure across the provinces. In addition to there being a dire need for infrastructure, some of the necessities like water and electricity is not being provided at schools. This is an extremely disheartening situation. One of our partner schools recently actually got funded for a fully funded lab as well as library. And then the teacher went away for the vacation, and it turned out that they were looted and vandalized. So it turns out that once they do actually get funding, sometimes it doesn't actually prove to be in the long run. As you can see, this lack of infrastructure and resources will cause an issue for students to be able to learn STEM. The next metric I'd like to use is fail and pass rates of mathematics and sciences. So these are statistics from 2008 to 2016. The table shows that the students that have written mathematics and science from 2008 to 2016 have actually decreased. The proportion of candidates that are passing mathematics with a 70% has significantly decreased, and it's still in the single figures. It's 6.9% in 2016. Also, around 40 to 50% of students receive only 0 to 29%. That's really low. When we're trying to educate students, we also need to take into account their backgrounds. So this table shows the literacy level of parents and people within the province. The province with the highest proportion of literate adults is actually Gauteng, following in suit with Western Cape. When parents are not literate, it becomes more difficult for students to learn because now they have to look for a support system outside of their home. And because schools are already overpopulated, it makes it difficult for them to find that comfort there. Building on the literacy rates, we see the languages that are spoken in households. Our diversity makes us unique and proud to be South African. But when we do not take that diversity into account when we are educating students, we actually cause a detriment to their education. From the stats, we can see that isiZulu is the most spoken language in South Africa with 5.7 million. Thereafter is isiXhosa with 3.8 million. English is ranked as fourth as a home language in South Africa. Born in an English-speaking home, I really took that for granted. Being taught in English, writing my exams in English, reading textbooks in English, I thought that it was perfectly normal. And then I started teaching at Kasimetz, and I realized that not everybody is as fortunate as I am. A tutor at Kasimetz, Tebogo, narrated a story to me. I'd like to quote his words on stage today. He said, "Ridhwana, I was teaching at a public school in Soweto for approximately 2 years. I was a maths teacher there. I speak English and I speak Tswana as my home language. Being a Tswana-speaking person does not necessarily mean that I speak and understand all the other African languages fluently. As a teacher in school, I quickly realized that sometimes English was a fourth or fifth home language for a lot of these kids. This meant that even though I was proficient at my job, I still struggled to teach the class because firstly, English was not their first language. Secondly, their foundation in school for English was not very good. And thirdly, the students spoke as many as 6 to 7 languages in the class, and I could not communicate with each one of them in their home language. When I used high words, the students struggled to understand me. Theorems like Pythagoras were foreign on their tongues, and concepts were lost in translation of the language barriers. I learned a couple of lessons from Tebogo when he told me the story, and I applied them to Kasimetz. I'd like to share them later on. The next metric that I used was transport. So a lot of the students, a whopping 12.3 million students, actually walk to school. And about 81% of them indicated that it takes them approximately half an hour to reach their school. By the time students go to school, especially in under-resourced areas, we find that they are tired. Some of them haven't had food before they left. Some of them don't have proper shoes. They're low on energy, and so they tend to retain less information. Also, when we have any additional programs, we tend to have them in Sandton or in Killarney, when in actual fact, these students can't reach those areas easily. They need to be within our communities. These are only some of the problems that I experience on a daily basis. There are others that I experience with the Casimets program in the classroom. Look at all those smiling faces. For all the problems that we have in South Africa, when in every single lesson, I find that the students are excited. They have an eagerness to learn and explore, and their parents and their schools are willing to get involved and to provide a better education for them. This serves as my motivation to help to find solutions that expose and empower them to a better future. So the way that we've tackled some of the problems, solving the problems at Casimets, is we've tried to work within the bounds and within the constraints that South Africa has at the moment. And at other times, we actually try and move those constraints. So here are some of the solutions that we apply. The first one is transport and infrastructure. So 100% of our students walk to the program after school every week. And that's why we've created the program to be in the heart of Soweto. We've partnered with an American Space Library, and we host the program there. It makes it accessible and comfortable for the students to be able to walk to the program every day. Here at the hub, we also have high-speed internet access and infrastructure. Foundations first. So our strategy is to always first teach the foundations and improve on the foundations before we start introducing things like robotics and coding. So keep in mind Tebogo's experience from earlier on, the story that I narrated. The language barriers have caused a steeper learning for the students, and so we focus on recapping and further explaining those basic concepts before we start delving into more advanced concepts. We also want to prepare their minds for logical and analytical thinking so that they can learn to practice STEM at a later stage. Some of the techniques that Tebogo and other volunteers have, including myself, have tried to implement is we try not to use very complex words. We use the basics of English in order to teach them. We also then try and speak to them in their home language if they're not understanding a concept in English. And thereafter, we translate it back to English. In addition, we really focus on foundations and sort of making sure that those are really solid before we move on to things like robotics and coding. So, real-world examples. So the next practice that we implement is that when we teach a concept, we make sure that we know how the students are actually going to be learning that, applying that concept in the real world. So my favorite tech gadget to build is a little microbit with a sensor and some coding. And usually I start off the lesson by asking them, so who thinks that they can build a park distance control system in one of those fancy cars where when you move closer to an object, it starts beeping? And usually the answer is, no, madam, we can't do that. That's too complicated for us. And what I do is I break down the problem. And we show them how they'd use mathematics to calculate the distances and the angles from the obstruction to the device. We then use a little bit of physics, which basically shows them the circuitry that they'd apply to the microbit. And then we put everything together using a little bit of coding and hardware knowledge. With a hunger to learn, belief in themselves, and a good foundation, I help them to realize that anything is possible. We do loads of other things. We show them how a convection and conduction is done using balloons and candles that we put under those balloons. We also just try to use as many examples as possible. We try and make it fun, interesting, and exciting, because we believe that if we make it fun and exciting, they'll want to step into the roles of our future engineers and scientists. Being a kick-ass engineer is not only about being able to solve problems, but it's also about things like being able to communicate effectively, being able to collaborate, being able to prioritize, and being able to set goals. Hence, we grow and empower them to be well-rounded individuals by introducing lessons that focus on the more practical side of life. We provide mentorship both inside and outside of classrooms. Our tutors not only inspire them within classrooms on a daily basis, but they also provide practical advice to them. We assure them that they have the guidance and support from our program. In order for us to make a significant impact on our youth, we need to be able to build a sustainable model that will empower and expose as many students as possible. Eventually, the hope is that we can build these models into school. Currently, we impact around 20 to 30 students coming through a cohort of Kasi Maths. We've begun to implement conferences with Mangaung and Western area where we're able to teach them remotely. But the next step is to spread the lessons from Kasi Maths far and wide. Hence, I've started working on a scalable prototype that will allow students to be able to access this learning content with minimal data usage and infrastructure costs. The initial plans is to actually roll out these applications at the American spaces where they have access to internet and infrastructure, but eventually to allow these applications to work on low-end resolution devices with offline first being a priority. We have to cater for African problems. In addition to this, we aim to actually concentrate on foundations first. So at a grade 1 level, actually start introducing the English pronunciations of things, phonics, etc. And at a higher level, we'll then introduce them to concepts like STEM, which they can then apply to whatever options they want for the future. So we are aware of the government's plan to introduce robotics from grade R upwards next year. I personally think that this initiative is admirable, and I support any sort of improvements. However, it is unlikely that grade 1 learners from previously disadvantaged backgrounds will actually benefit from it until we can fix their foundations. Thereafter, once they reach the higher grades, we can start introducing things like STEM and robotics and coding. We unfortunately cannot mimic first world countries because we do not have the infrastructure, resources, and foundations that they do. So let's work as a community to improve the state of education. Firstly, let's be aware of the challenges that the youth face, especially in underdeveloped areas. When I started at Kasi Maths, it was a rude awakening for me. I was exposed to so much that I didn't know from the comfort of my home. And so today, I hope I've been able to convey that message to you all and make you aware of the problems that we do have in South Africa in education. Remember that no deed is too small. If there's some way that you can contribute, then do it. This may be in the form of sponsoring programs, donating old equipment, or anything that you think will be useful. In addition, you can perhaps volunteer time to tutor. If you can't do that, perhaps remotely do some admin work or helping with the curriculums. There are other things that companies can do. So things like creating learnership for these students so that they can get some real-world experience. Or even just raising awareness, just talking to people about the problems and coming up with solutions. That's also fine. There's always some way that we can contribute as individuals and as a community. As techies in this room, let's use our skills to reduce the education gap. We need more of what Google South Africa is doing, that is launching free Wi-Fi in the Cape Flats, in the Western Cape, through its Google Station program. We need this at a much bigger scale. We need more read out loud features to help those that don't speak English as a first language. We need low data usage in apps that can work on low resolution devices. We need ways to distribute low-end smartphones to communities. And we need smart tech people like yourselves to be able to teach digital skills to those in under-resourced communities so that they can get jobs more easily. We need to keep building to do better. We are so much stronger as a community when we collaborate and form strong partnerships with each other. If there are organizations that are doing similar things, let's help each other to make a greater impact. Let's not reinvent the wheel over and over again. Instead, let's learn and grow from each other. As a community, if we do not try and solve these issues, we are deliberately excluding people. We will not be able to create diverse and inclusive places in the workforce if we are forgetting to invite those in the under-resourced communities and those that are less fortunate than us. In the long term, by tackling and increasing the quality of education, I strongly believe that we can decrease the poverty and we can decrease the violence and crime in South Africa. As South Africans, let's try and take control of our country and build a brighter future. And of course, I have the Springboks photo up there to invoke that excitement and happiness in everyone. So finally, if you have any questions, please find me afterwards. Let's have a discussion around education. You can follow me on Twitter or visit our website. And I'd like to end this talk with a quote by one of my heroes, Malcolm X. And Malcolm X says, "Education is the passport to the future, for tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today." Thank you very much.
Out of curiosity, how much of a challenge has it been to find teachers and mentors that can communicate to the students, given how many different home languages there could be?
So, firstly, it's a challenge just to find tutors and volunteers to be able to work with the students, but then to actually find the volunteers that speak in their home languages. Actually, that hasn't been as much of a challenge. Predominantly of our tutors are actually from Soweto, and so a lot of them speak a diverse number of the African languages, and a lot of them are from UJ as well, and so they do speak the African languages. So a lot of the times when I struggle to communicate with any of the students, they're actually able to take over. But just in general, it's really difficult to find tutors.
Hi, Ridhwana. Thank you for your contribution to our community.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you what has been, I guess, the factor or factors that have contributed to sustainability for Kasi Maths. I'm sure you've been aware of lots of mentorship programs at high school level, particularly for young girls, and they don't sustain. So what has kept Kasi Maths going?
I think the main thing is the support that we've received. So the support, for instance, from the US Embassy that has allowed us to have venues within these different communities so that we don't actually have to struggle to find venues for the students. It's been other partnerships that have allowed us, it's been the tutors that have helped us to build a sustainable model because they dedicate their time to be able to teach the students. And finally, most importantly, it's been the partnerships that we've formed with the schools within the community. So when we have support from the parents and the school educators and the principal, especially the one school I'm working with, Ridhwana, the principal is just amazing, and she shows enthusiasm for everything we do, and she helps out in any way possible. I find that that really helps with sustaining the program, because when you know it's making an impact, that's when you ensure that you're able to sort of keep it running for years to come. And then there's other things like just the financial aspects and all the other partners that we have had, but it's definitely a support from the communities that has helped. I seen a question there.
Hi.
Hi.
Two questions. First one's easy. Where in Soweto is this innovation space? And then the second one is, how effective is your simpler communication method specifically in relation to further education, because textbooks and lecturers don't take that method into account?
100%. So the answer to the first question is we're based in Rosa Parks Library in Soweto. And the second question, the answer to that is it's been effective for now, right? It's solving the current problem. But as I mentioned in like the sustainability section, we actually need to target it a lot earlier. So like at a grade 1 level, where we're actually targeting the foundations of students' English and actually helping them with pronunciations, phonics, etc. So right now, it's solving the current problem with just being able to help them to understand mathematics and all the other subjects. But I do think that it has to happen much earlier on, and I hope that we can do that at some point.
Hi. My question is, I guess, a bit different. I'd like to ask, Kasimeds, you probably use content that you yourself have created, that you yourself see is working, that is probably very different from what schools, universities teach. Mm-hmm. How did you come about with that content? Maybe you don't need to share trade secrets or anything, but how did you come about with that content, and how did you measure its effectiveness to the kids?
That's a really interesting question. So the first thing is, how did we come up with the content? We started the traditional route. We pulled the school's curriculum and we collaborated with the teachers and we started teaching them what they would learn in school. And we realized that they weren't excited and they weren't having fun and they were understanding a little bit more, but it wasn't something that they enjoyed coming to every day. And so what we did eventually is we chose visual learning as our key. So we bought science kits that would explain conduction and convection, and they'd actually be able to do experiments to see it. The same with mathematics, like when they do angles and trigonometry and geometry, we actually do 3D printing in parallel with it, so that they're using the concepts from geometry and trigonometry and actually applying it to real life, like world examples. So that's what really gets them excited and makes them want to do it. Your second question was, what was the second question? How do I measure it? So we have a number of metrics that we use at Kasimeds in order to measure impact. We go through their school records. We make sure that they're actually improving as the year goes by. We measure the attendance levels, the engagement levels, things like that. There's a whole number of metrics that we apply.
Yeah, thanks. Very inspiring.
Thank you.
What is your greatest need at the moment to scale up? Obviously, you have many needs, but I want to get to, is there something that we actually can help with your need?
So right now, I think my greatest need, not taking into account growth and sustainability, for the future, right now, every single year, for the past year, what we've really struggled with is getting reliable volunteers and tutors on board because we are in a physical space. So we've got about 5 or 6 very reliable volunteers, but it's taken a long time to get there. And in order to grow sustainably, but within physical spaces, we'd need more volunteers. But that's why I'm sort of working on a scalable prototype that will reduce the need for in-person volunteers at some point, and hopefully we can sort of digitize that. But that is definitely one of the biggest challenges.
Thanks. That was a really great talk.
Thank you.
I just wanted to know, getting involved with children at a young age and making learning fun, have you found that any particular influence or increase in the number of kids moving into high school who are in your program who move to actually take maths and actually take science? Because that's, of course, one of the issues, is that those numbers are also influenced by a lot of kids opt to take maths lit instead.
So definitely, and I think that, so the question was, has there been a move for students to essentially start taking mathematics at a grade 10 level? So we haven't actually focused on primary school learners. Our first cohort running through Kasi Maths was grade 8 learners because we felt that was the time when they start getting introduced to high school mathematics. So this cohort that we've been running through Kasi Maths right now, we have had them in grade 8 and grade 9. And we found that at least 90% of them actually chose mathematics at a grade 10 level. So we do keep measures of success and impact at the Kasi Maths program. And because they enjoyed all the applications and all the sort of understanding how it works in the real world, they were excited to move forward with maths at a grade 10 level. Thank you.
It was a good talk.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask, having known how the impact of doing mathematics metric, do you guys give such talk to high school, to local high schools about why is it important? I'm asking because I know a couple of schools from where I come, my township, they decided to drop maths for all learners. And now you said from 2015 to 2019, the maths student dropped significantly. Yeah. So do you also motivate schools to give students or learners that option to be able to choose mathematics in grade 10?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question. So the question was, do we motivate students to be able to, at a matric level, sort of keep with mathematics and, I guess, move into STEM courses as well? So I have done that. I work very closely with a school in Soweto, Tlatlachang School, and we speak to the principal, and the principal is very dedicated in doing all those things. But I do think you have a very good point that we have to go to these schools and actually motivate these students. And I find that one of the co-founders of Kasi Maths actually comes from Khayelitsha here in Cape Town. And her background was she had to support her brothers and sisters, and she comes from a very poor home, and now she's a doctor in chemistry. And having people like that go back into the schools and motivate them to say, you know what, I came from this community and look what I'm doing now. There's nothing stopping you from doing that yourself. I think that's really, really important, and we need to be able to do more of that. Okay, thank you so much.